Hi guys, my name is Casey McGrath and I'm a professional violinist, a college instructor in music, a studio teacher, and a B-licensed skydiver. And I'm so excited and thrilled to be here to talk to you guys today about managing stage fright, or in the academic world as we refer to it as performance anxiety. This was the topic of my doctoral dissertation research as a violin performance major at the University of Illinois. It eventually got expanded into a book that I'm also really excited to share with you. Performance Anxiety Strategies, a Musician's Guide to Managing Stage Fright. So this was my dissertation that got expanded into essentially a resource manual for musicians to be made aware of all the therapies and research methods there were to counteract stage fright. And certainly confidence compromisers are things we all deal with as performing artists. And skydiving is definitely not an exception to that rule, as I found when I took my first tandem jump. So today I thought first I would give you a little bit of background on my musical career to give you some perspective on my own personal journey with counteracting my nerves. And then I'd like to share with you some of my favorite strategies I've found to be most effective in managing my nerves and the pre-performance butterflies that I think, whether you're jumping out of a plane or you're going on stage, that we all can relate to experiencing. So you'll see some of these pictures of me performing as a solo concerto artist. I'm concertmaster of an orchestra now, Fox Valley Orchestra, and I've concertmastered with Fox Valley Phil, and I also played and still occasionally play with some suburban professional orchestras in the Chicago area. I started doing that a lot just to put myself out there. But probably one of the greatest challenges are some of these pictures that you're seeing in front of you now, probably as a concerto soloist, you're playing from memory, and that already is something that's a daunting task for many musicians. And for some reason, violinists and pianists are just kind of expected to play from memory, even though that may not be true for every instrument. It's a pretty substantial commitment and undertaking to do that, let alone, aside from the technical challenges of whatever piece you're playing. So again, these moments were very pivotal to me in proving myself to myself. Essentially just putting myself out there and knowing that I had the skills and the competency and the ability and the preparation. I mean, part of it too is just studying how your brain works under pressure, and I was fascinated with that. So again, I started soloing a lot with orchestras, and I've been very fortunate to have done it many, many times. And for many musicians that are just, who are not professional soloists when they're children, getting to do this even once is a big deal. So again, I'm very fortunate and very grateful to have had the opportunity to do it so many times. But what I've learned, I think, in the whole process is that there are a few tried and true principles to adequate preparation. And some of the strategies that I'll discuss with you today have a lot to do with keeping that positive mindset and to making sure that the skills that you have are well matched for the challenge. So again, that was one of my biggest takeaways of doing these kinds of performances, just because of the pressure that was involved and how I would respond to it. Again, it really was an undertaking that I think not only helped me learn more about how to perform well and to master my craft, but also how to better manage my brain in those high pressure situations. So, what exactly is stage fright? I think a lot of people have misconceptions about what exactly it means, and probably the one that bothers me the most is that it's something to be taken lightly. And second to that is probably just the fact that many people think that if you suffer from stage nerves, that maybe you're not cut out to do whatever you're trying to do, which again is one of the probably the biggest things when I wrote this book that I set out to clarify and to debunk. So stage fright, and I wanted to give you guys like the actual clinical definition because it's important, to just be thorough, I think, in this. So it's basically scientifically defined as the experience of persisting, distressful apprehension about and or actual impairment of performance skills in a public context to a degree unwarranted given the individual's aptitude, training, and level of preparation. That's pretty thorough. And it also reminds me of the definition of anxiety, which is the fear of impending doom. And I love that because it really comes across as scary as it is to experience. So as far as what stage fright, like how it affects us as skydivers and how it affects my musical performance, is first is I think probably more noticeably is the physical symptoms of it. Everyone can relate to that. I think as a violinist, as you'll see, here in the butterflies equation slide there, the physical manifestation of nerves included for us violinists, like shaking fingers, the trembling bow arm. That happens so often even when you're totally walking out with confidence and perceptible comfort. You might start playing and notice that your body doesn't agree, essentially. And maybe you've experienced that in the sky too. Like you could be completely cool and relaxed going up to altitude, and then, maybe just minutes before or seconds before you gotta exit, you might notice a tremble in your knee, perhaps. And basically what this comes down to is that our bodies are wired to be in survival mode, and so all of these physical manifestations of nerves are really there with like the right intention, which is to protect us. So say if we were to go back in time a little bit and you were facing off with a saber-toothed tiger, these are the kind of physical things that might actually help you survive that kind of battle, essentially. So something interesting from my research was that there is kind of a relationship between emotional arousal, as we'd say, and athletic performance, and basically, how your heightened sense of awareness and in that survival mode mentality, like how that affects, your body and how you're reacting to pressure. So again, there is in this theory, it's a high level of this kind of arousal is essential for optimal performance. Again, the idea and the goal of this talk is not to say, that you should be so relaxed and almost in a Zen-like flow state that you're unaware of your surroundings, because certainly in skydiving, that's not a safe place to be. You want to be aware of everybody else. You want to be aware certainly of any of the factors that you need to handle as they present themselves, so that you can have a safe and enjoyable experience. But there is, too much of that essentially is what starts to be something that compromises your experience and compromises your ability to use your skills in the most efficient, high performance level. So as a violinist, we have to be very aware of the orchestra. We have to be very aware of the pianist if we're playing with the pianist, or the ensemble in general, or just, again, like the acoustics of the room and ourselves. And if, maybe because of our heightened state that we might be playing a little faster than we had planned, which is something that I personally, have had to really work through. I get excited and then I end up, rushing passages and playing a little too quickly, and I have to remember to kind of pull back a little bit. And I think too, as a skydiver, that's something I've really had to learn to manage, is just, my mental agenda and how I'm handling each challenge as it comes at me. So again, the physical manifestations that you might experience might be just like upset stomach, of course, shortness of breath. That's a huge thing. We'll talk a little bit about how breathing can improve your pre-game experience and prepare you for a more enjoyable time in the sky. And I've also found that to be really helpful under canopy. Again, I'm fairly new to the sport, but I've spent a lot of time on stage. So these two worlds being in parallel are definitely something I'm passionate about connecting for you today. The psychological symptoms of stage fright are other things too that maybe people don't talk about so much. And another motive behind putting out the book was to make this dialogue a more frequent thing. I think there's nothing worse than people feeling alone in believing that they're the only ones who suffer from a constant, like, repetitive, relentless habit of negative self-talk, or something I call catastrophizing. And catastrophizing is when you literally take a situation and you blow it so out of proportion without any substantiation. So it's exaggerated to the point that can really be detrimental to, again, not only your experience, but also like how you're handling it. It may not be as bad as you might perceive in your panic. I also talk about survival mentality, and parentheticals there talks about burning building mode, which is not a scholarly label, but it's something that I came up with myself. Basically, as a teacher, I notice this with students more than anything, and I have experienced it myself. And what this is the tendency to be so focused on getting through something that you become very blind, like as if you have blinders on to the whole thing up until that point. So I call it burning building mode because it's as if the experience that you're having, like whatever you're doing, like the whole house is on fire and you are like running for the door. And the only thing that you are focused on, and the only thing that you are goaling yourself to do is to get to that door and to get to safety. So in skydiving, like if the second you exit the plane, you are only thinking about landing safely. You already, first of all, you can already imagine the dangers that would present. But it's also, again, like, what's the point of doing something if that's the ultimate and really the singular goal? As a musician, we practice so many hours, thousands of hours. And again, some of those concerto performance pictures that Courtney shared with you here, I can't tell you how many hours I spent preparing for those 20, 30, 40, 50, even sometimes 10 minutes of performance. There's so much of that time invested that it struck me as just being such a shame that we don't have more fun doing it. So as a skydiver, if your happiest moment is when you've landed safely, yes, there is definitely an exhilarating facet to that shouldn't be discounted and should be embraced wholeheartedly. But if that's the only thing that you're really looking for when you get out of the plane, like, it definitely would, be cause to evaluate like why you're skydiving at all. And that would be a really sad thing. So again, burning building mode is something that ultimately, like, first would be, just being able to slow down your brain enough to not only manage the challenges, but also to enjoy the experience as it happens. So before we further discuss the causes of performance anxiety, I did want to touch on one thing called the witnesses. And this is actually a really cool way to label exactly the characteristics behind the inner chatter you might be suffering from in the sky. So there are 3 witnesses. One I didn't include here because it's awesome, and that would be the flow state. And basically the flow state is where we all want to get. That's a place where everything about the experience is in perfect harmony. So the circumstances, the environment, the challenge, your skill set, your level of enjoyment, your mental focus, all of that is in complete equilibrium with each other. That's when we perform our best. That's essentially what a lot of the resources that I included in my resource list for you guys as an addendum to this chat, and then also a lot of the books that I read myself, trying to empower my own performance, they always talk about something called the flow state. And I can definitely count on one hand the times I've really gotten to it. And it's a really amazing, almost euphoric place to be. The other 2 witnesses are not so desirable. One is a little worse than the other. That one would be the self-conscious witness. And that is the worst. That's like the voice in your head that's offering very unhelpful commentary on everything you're doing as it happens, or offering really pessimistic, predictive advice about what could go wrong or what they think will go wrong based on your past performance. So as a violinist, if I'm playing a particularly challenging technical passage and I anticipate it coming up, the self-conscious witness will take that moment and that opportunity to chime in with its forecast about how well it thinks I'm going to do. And not only is that distracting, but then you've put like a negative image in your head. So it's definitely out of the 3, and definitely out of those 2 between the self-conscious and the neutral witness, the self-conscious witness is the one that we want to address most. The neutral witness is a little bit easier to coexist with in that it still comments, but it just takes notes. So it's really not offering a pessimistic or, I guess, a negative opinion about anything, but it does observe. So we would just call it like the observer witness. And that one I don't think is too bad to deal with in the sky. I mean, it is good to kind of notice things. But again, any inner chatter that you have that is distracting you from the task at hand is probably not the best thing to have going on. So to better manage that is definitely crucial. As far as actual causes, I could talk about this all day because this is like one of my most favorite topics in relation to performance anxiety. But there's a little short list there for you to look at. Inadequate preparation, maybe when the task is just a little beyond what your skill set would allow for you to do something successfully. Lack of self-efficacy, self-belief, lack of experience. We'll talk about that in relation to exposure therapy and how you can really expand your experience skill set without setting yourself up for failure. Also, personal life experiences and past negative experiences, those kind of go hand in hand, and something I did want to just touch on because I know I'm addressing some amazing, focused, high-achieving, powerful women through this sport is something that I think many of us deal with, and definitely personally I have battled, is perfectionism. There are different types of perfectionism. There's the kind of perfectionism that's what we would call socially prescribed. And that's like maybe if you were raised in a household where you had to have straight A's, or if you were on varsity sports that you had to be the highest performing individual. That would be basically where you have to live up to the standards of other people. And then there's also self-oriented perfectionism, in which whenever you see an error in your work, or if you're not performing at 100%, that you find it very hard to be forgiving of yourself. And that can make any experience, or really any endeavor, less than enjoyable. So those are things that I feel as women in the sport, like we really deal with to a great degree. And so really, I think a lot of this will come back to just being able to keep your inner dialogue empowering, and not only addressing it in the sport, but in our lives as well. Okay, so now that we've discussed some of the causes behind performance anxiety, I wanted to share with you some of my favorite strategies to help counteract it. Now, these are just a few of the many that I researched, and that's only tip of the iceberg as far as what's actually out there and available to everybody. My first favorite one is something referred to as the zone of mastery. Now, I did include this book in my list of helpful resources that Courtney is going to attach as like a supplemental material to this chat. It's a book by John Gorey, and in it he discusses something called performing in the zone. And what the zone actually is the skill set, or the span of skills necessary and most applicable to the task and challenge at hand. So making sure that whatever goal you've set out to accomplish, or whatever the challenge is in front of you, that you have the appropriate skill set and preparation to handle that challenge well, is crucial in battling stage nerves. So expanding your zone of mastery goes in complete partnership with something called exposure therapy that I wanted to talk about next. And that's exactly what the name implies. It just means to jump often. But one of the things about exposure therapy I really wanted to stress was that the situations and the circumstances should be as identical as you can make them incrementally. So in other words, if you're going to introduce change or differences in the jump plan, or the weather or the wind speed, or whatever the variables may be, that you do that mindfully and very conservatively, because there's so much to learn about performing repeatedly in the same type of situation. So, for instance, as a violinist, if I have to play a big concerto with an orchestra, my typical practice is that I'll go play for some high schools and just run the piece for a bunch of kids. And then I do like a little master class, and it's really fun. But what I usually do is I'll do a performance for maybe 3 orchestra classes back to back. So the same classroom, almost the same time of day, same number of kids, just to kind of see how I react 3 times over, as opposed to one shot at it. So as a jumper, I think there's so much to be said about jumping frequently on the same day. And I definitely, as I've dealt with my own nerves as a skydiver and being a newcomer to the sport, I've dealt with that temptation to just maybe jump a couple times. And sometimes when it's been a very overwhelming experience, to just kind of, call it a day. And even this season, I'm really goaling myself to like just do one more. When I get to that point, maybe just, to get myself to get up there one last time and just get one more experience I can learn from out of it. And that really will help expand your zone of mastery in a positive, enriching way that will leave you with more positive experiences. Because again, the more negative experiences you have, the more things that you have to work through that would keep you on the ground as opposed to in the air. Okay, so next I wanted to discuss practicing positive self-talk. And this is something that is not specific to just skydiving, of course. And I think I would be hard-pressed to find a person who hasn't dealt with this in their personal lives. So remember before I was talking a little bit about the witnesses of the self-conscious witness and the neutral witness. And this is definitely more of where the self-conscious witness comes into play. I wanted to stress, though, that practicing self-talk in a empowering manner, having an empowering dialogue going on internally, is more of the goal than eliminating it altogether. Again, sometimes that inner monologue is something that probably serves to protect us. But as far as skydiving is concerned, it's very defeating to adopt a vernacular in which you use something that my Olympic sports psychologist, sports coach that I worked with referred to as extreme language. And this is really a vocabulary of hopeless inducing, just debilitating words that really don't have a specificity to qualify what the issue actually is. So when you use extreme language like words like horrible, awful, or terrible, unsubstantiated generalizations like I always, land poorly, or I've never been a good belly flyer or something like that. They really don't tell you, or you're not telling yourself exactly what you need to be addressing, or what skill set you need to improve, or what exactly you did that was in such error. So an example of ineffective self-talk would be, and again, some of this may feel a little clinical, so bear with me, but the first ineffective self-talk dialogue might be, quote, "I have always been a horrible canopy pilot. This time won't be any different." So you can already see the self-conscious witness like forecasting what you're not going to do well. And then this generalization of always and horrible, like the use of those words, like they don't tell you exactly like where maybe your skills are deficient, and at the same time where they're not so deficient. So reworded, maybe a more empowering version of that might be, "I'm bettering my canopy pilot with every jump by taking canopy courses and canopy coaching." So there you're telling yourself like, hey, these are the measures I'm taking to better my skills. And then I set reasonable goals that get easier to achieve with every jump. So again, you're acknowledging that your skill set is bettering, and therefore, if your skill set is bettering, your chances of success are greater. And then finally, my skill set is expanding and I am gaining more confidence with every landing. It's like you're giving yourself a positive forecast to say, I am gaining confidence. And the more that you speak that truth, the more your reality will reflect that. So it may feel like you're forcing this again, almost clinical rewording. But I think to really rewire how our brain functions, we have to force this dialogue on it for some time until it becomes our default. I did want to mention how this is definitely not something just limited to your skydiving. It's got to be every day. If you allow yourself to speak internally about, your deficiencies as a person, or maybe something you don't like about your body, or how other people might perceive you and your own insecurities, if you allow that dialogue to transpire on an everyday basis, then you can expect your skydiving brain to operate differently. So as I've found skydiving to be so enriching to my life just as a person, this is another facet in which it can really help you get through maybe, that defeating habit of beating yourself up, so make this a practice in your waking life And you'll find that when you pull into the DZ that maybe you're already in that habit of empowerment, and it won't be so hard to silence those negative voices that you might have chattering on when you're in the sky. One of the last strategies I wanted to share with you guys today is actually one of my favorites. It's called visual motor rehearsal. And I first learned about this through a book called With Winning in Mind by Olympic gold medal rifle shooter Lanny Basham. And in it, he discusses his preparation for the Olympic Games and how there was this one time where he couldn't get to a range. So when he couldn't actually get to a physical range to practice, he mentally imagined himself there. And what's interesting about that is that technically your brain doesn't quite understand the difference between actual events and things that you're just imagining. So again, to better illustrate that, for instance, there's this study with these two basketball teams, and they were kind of in competition to see who could throw the same number of free throws, or have the higher score of free throw shots. So one team was on the bench and just imagined themselves throwing free throws, and the other team was actually on the court practicing that. What's interesting is when the two teams faced off, the one that had just mentally walked themselves, the team that had just done visual motor rehearsal, was actually the better performing team of the two. Similarly, there's another study about golf putting, and that if people have like negative reinforcement as they putt the ball, that they were more likely to be unsuccessful. So how this relates to skydiving and how it related to music was that, or a way that you can apply this to bettering your time in the air, is to skydive when you're not skydiving. And so as a performer, to me, like it's not just imagining like the actual performance. I mean, there's value to that, certainly. But I think what I have found to be most effective is that I imagine every aspect of the day of the performance. I imagine packing my car up. I imagine getting my instrument out of the car when I get to the hall. I imagine the temperature and the air when I open the backstage door. And I imagine seeing the audience. I imagine as much of the actual experience as I can. I try to mentally experience. And so maybe with skydiving, if you were struggling with getting over maybe a harder landing, or something that maybe just a less than desirable experience or memory that you have, if you're trying to kind of rewrite that, to actually mentally do that, like revisit that jump and like walk yourself through step by step, like what happened, and rewrite the ending, like write over the part that you weren't thrilled about and experience it mentally as though it was a more favorable experience than it actually was. And in doing that, not only are you're gradually undoing the effects of maybe that less than desirable memory, but you're building a new one in place of it. So again, visual motor rehearsal is just something that you can recreate the whole experience as if it's actually happening, and that does give you some edge when you actually get to the drop zone in real life. And then finally, too, as it relates to this, is just to be aware of your breathing. There's something called the 4-7-8 method, and I really like this. It's just something I've done, on the ride to altitude a lot, just to keep myself calm. And of course, I practice this backstage too. Is just breathing in for 4 counts, holding that breath for 7 counts, and then exhaling for 8. And you just continue this until you feel that physically you've been able to calm yourself. And you might notice in your visual motor rehearsal that your heart rate will increase, just like it would in real time, which is just, again, really fascinating. But it's also testament to how empowered you actually are to counteract some of these less than desirable symptoms and manifestations of fear, that you can do on a regular basis, and it doesn't always have to be on the day that you've set aside to jump. So I know it goes without saying that there are many other strategies, therapies, and means by which to address performance nerves than we've had time to discuss today. So I would really encourage you guys to check out the list of helpful resources I've included as an attachment to this chat. Secondly, I really just want to thank you guys for letting me come in and talk about something I am so passionate about, and really to just be addressing such an amazing community of women was such a privilege and an honor, and I can't tell you how grateful I am for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Rhythm Skydiving 101, the first app designed specifically for the new skydiver. Over 50 topics will get you from the ground to the air and back again. Available free for both Android and iPhone. Download Rhythm Skydiving 101 now and make every skydive count.